Everyone's a little bit autistic. I think when people say that, they're thinking that they're being sympathetic or nice to people, but it's actually very invalidating because it's like, oh no, you're fine because we're all a little bit autistic. It's like kind of brushing off someone's difficulties that they're having. It's also just not correct because the autism spectrum is not linear. It is more like a circle, and every autistic person has different experiences with different traits, and those traits can fluctuate over time. And you're either on that spectrum or you're not. Autistic traits are human traits, so anyone can experience them. They're not just like, only autistic people can experience these things. No, that's not how it works. So there's that one. Then there's the only boys can be autistic. Not true. I think part of the reason we have that misconception is because the diagnostic criteria that we have for autism is based on 8-year-old boys, which makes it very hard for females to get diagnosed.
What does an autistic person look like? Like, is there a model? Like, maybe we should find out.
I do hear that one quite a bit. You don't look autistic. I had a psychiatrist say it to me once. It's such a silly statement because it's like, what, have you developed X-ray vision? Can you see my brain? I'm sorry. I often respond to people, well, you don't look neurotypical. And then I let them get offended by it and watch them trying to figure out why they're offended by it, because that statement of you don't look autistic, it is a very ableist statement, right?
Have you seen them being able to like get offended? Have you seen them?
I've seen a few people get offended.
All right.
But it does make them think. I mean, I do still explain it to them, and I explain, you know, autism doesn't look a particular way. What, do you want me rocking in a corner, flapping my hands all the time? Like, we still have lives. We still have to do things. Yeah. Someone said, let's have a chin wag, and I'm like, what the heck is that? I still haven't learned it. I don't know what that is. But there was another one that was, we're talking about the ability to think laterally. I was like, what? Ability to think sideways? Like, how do you think laterally? I don't understand. And so I like actually started reading up on it, and it's to do with like dogs tilting their heads.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, when there's a metaphor I don't understand, I do get someone to explain it to me. But I think it's not metaphors that I have the hard time with, it's implications, because I mean, people don't use metaphors in everyday language, right? But implications are in everything. The other thing with that is like people don't realize when I'm joking. It's kind of amusing. Anyway, gifts. No. I like gifts if I don't have to open them in front of people. I really struggle with like
the reaction. Yeah,
because I don't know how I'm supposed to react to the gift, and I always get it wrong. But I've also my whole life, I don't know why this is what I do, but if I open a gift and it's a clothing item, I put it on immediately. If I get multiple clothing items, I put them all on at the same time. It was quite funny for Christmas because my brother's girlfriend got me this top, and I opened my gift and immediately put it on before everyone had finished opening the gift. So my brother was like, oh, where's the top that you got her? And she was like, she's wearing it.
That's what they're supposed to be, right?
Well, I think part of the reason I do it was because I couldn't figure out how I was supposed to react to show that I appreciated it, and so I figured if I put it on, they know I like it. So that's what I did.
So going back to that diagnosis for you, so what can we say to those who are still like haven't been diagnosed, but they kind of like feel something is not quite right? And is there a cue or a trait that they need to find out, so at least they know how to navigate it?
It wasn't something I questioned. I would spend every single social interaction monitoring how much eye contact I was giving, monitoring the tone of my voice, monitoring the order of the words coming out of my mouth, what facial expressions I'm using, what emotion I'm portraying, what gestures I'm using, how much I'm moving, and like what the vibe of the group is, what emotion are they expressing, what are the social rules in the situation. It was exhausting, and I could barely listen to anyone who was talking, but I thought everyone was doing it, and so I was like, well, no one talks about this, so I'm not going to talk about it. and I would get so exhausted from it that I slowly learned that mimicking was easier. I've been doing that most of my life, to be fair, but mimicking would mean that I would copy the person's accent, I would copy their mannerisms, I would copy the patterns of their speech. And like, people would notice that I was picking up their mannerisms or their accent. Sometimes they'd think I was mocking them. I didn't realize that was me masking until I got diagnosed. And I was like, oh, wait, you're not all sitting there like consciously making all of these decisions about what your body and your mouth was doing the whole time. So yeah, once I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, well, since you are not doing that, I'm going to try and stop. Do you want to put the chicken in the oven before I arrive? I texted her back, no, because I don't want to. I still did it. I didn't want to, but I needed to do it, so I still did it. She arrived, she's like, oh, we should probably put the chicken in the oven. I'm like, what do you mean? I've already done it. She's like, well, you said no. I'm like, yeah, because you asked me if I want to. I don't want to.
How's the family?
Yeah, my family life, we had fallen apart. Like, I had no contact with my mum before my diagnosis. Things were just really bad between us. And then I got my diagnosis, and it just helped a lot of us actually understand what was actually going on and why there was so much hurt between us. And we're able to actually talk through that, and we have a much better relationship now, and it's really good. Especially realizing the pathological demand avoidance side of things. Like, I was a very stubborn child because of pathological demand avoidance. So anytime my parents would tell me to do something, I would just turn into a little bit of a demon, honestly. Very, very mad and angry anytime I was told to do anything. But now that we have that understanding, my mum's able to talk to me in a way that works, and she's able to understand my communication. But on top of that, so we figured out that some of the family members are also autistic, so I'm able to explain some of the things to my mum that she's maybe frustrated with them. So like, if there's something happening in their relationship and she's really annoyed about it, she talks to me about it, and I go, well, this is why that thing's happening. And my mum's learning like that when you want something from an autistic person, you have to give an explanation. You have to give the why and the logic behind it. And so she's learning how to have those conversations. Right now, it feels like she has to have a debate anytime she wants something done. But she's slowly learning the language to use to make that shorter and shorter so that she can not have to fight every time.
Right.
No, so I don't feel hunger. I don't feel fullness. Don't know when I need to drink. Don't know when I need the toilet. Like, I can't feel it. I feel nothing at all. I can go days without food and not realize because I just don't get hungry. I don't have those cues. I do have an alarm on my phone that tells me to eat. But yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, it would happen so much. I'd be like, oh yeah, it's been 3 days, haven't eaten. It was my normal. I just didn't realize that there were different feelings that people felt that I didn't feel. There have been very few times where I have felt hunger, but it lasts all of 2 seconds and then it's gone. Yeah.
That's going to be challenging. I mean, you have to remind yourself. Good thing we have alarms now in our phone.
Getting into a good routine is really helpful with that, because if I have a routine where it's like, okay, I get out of bed, I get changed. After I get changed, I eat food. And then after I eat food, I brush my teeth. Like, if my meal is associated with the rest of my routine, I have to do it. Whereas if it's like, oh, somewhere in there I eat food, then that's not gonna happen.
Right. Do you have allergies, like food allergies?
Takiwātanga in their own time and space.
Being cool. The kids that are in his class that have autism, super cool.
Autism's about a different perspective on life.
And once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person.
There is nothing wrong with having autism, you know. It's accepting it. Once you know you got it and accept it, get on with life a lot better, you know.
They bring change. They are non-judgmental.
Being different ways to thinking.
I'm autistic. If you don't look autistic, it is a very ableist statement.
Autism is a label. Forget the label and just live as normal life as possible. Autism is about hope.
Takiwātanga. Love Not Cure, exploring autism one strength at a time.
We are here in Autism NZ, and we're here to speak to Chanelle. She's the autistic advisor. Welcome for this podcast, and appreciate your time. I know it's a huge thing to ask. you still managed to give me some time. Right. So first, who is Chanelle Moriah?
I am one of the autistic advisors here. I also work in research, and I'm an author and illustrator. I'm also autistic, and I have ADHD and pathological demand avoidance.
Can you give me some background around what you do in Autism NZ as autistic advisor?
Oh yeah, so my role as an autistic advisor involves giving education presentations to employers and organisations, making resources depending on what the community needs. Sometimes there'll be some events that I'll attend and help with. I manage all of our Lego, which is fun. Working on research, doing data analysis at the moment. And then just kind of helping out where I'm needed. So sometimes we'll have clients come through outreach and they need an autistic perspective. So that would be my role to help with that.
All right. So giving autistic perspective on any aspects that relates to Autism NZ work, right?
Yeah. Well, if we get questions from clients or parents, and they just have a question that our outreach coordinators maybe don't have the knowledge about because they haven't lived as an autistic person, they might ask me and get my perspective on things, and then we can give that to the clients who are needing help.
I read their book. I actually brought your book here. I found out that you were diagnosed when you're already 21 years old. So I just want to understand, how were you feeling back then before the diagnosis?
I really struggled before getting my diagnosis. My mental health was very, very bad. So when I got my diagnosis, it actually ended up saving my life because I was very suicidal at the time. I'd been trying to take my life quite a lot. And then I got my diagnosis and it just explained everything. And I was able to use the right tools to help myself. I was able to find people who were similar to me. I was able to get work for the first time because I had the right accommodations. My diagnosis was very much a relief.
For that, so when did you start feeling that something is not quite right in your emotion?
I mean, I always felt different, and I got bullied a lot. I had lots of very negative labels. I knew I didn't fit in. So I mean, I guess I was struggling for a long time. But also I moved to New Zealand when I was 9, which was very hard as an undiagnosed autistic person who struggles with change. And so that alone was hard. And then I had lost a few family members, and I think it was around 12 years old. I was not coping. And then I went to college, and again, that's a very huge change. And even in that space, I was struggling to fit in anywhere, still getting bullied. So around 15 years old is when I became clinically depressed.
Whereabouts you're from originally?
South Africa.
Were you diagnosed as ADHD as well before, or it's just like I saw an article somewhere, I just forgot where I found it, and it seems like the behavior or the traits of the person with ADHD and autism are quite the same. Like it will confuse me with if I don't know anything about, which 100% I don't know anything about it.
My ADHD, I was assessed when I was 4, but the psychiatrist decided not to diagnose me, and instead I was put into a gifted kids program. I was pulled out of school, and I was homeschooled. And so because I was homeschooled, no one was really having an issue with my behaviors, so we didn't pursue a diagnosis. So I got my ADHD diagnosis formally when I was 22. So a year after my autism diagnosis, almost exactly. It was like 1 week after.
I know a friend who has a son with ADHD, and they're having medications. So how does it feel for you without any medications at all?
I've got the medication. So I was diagnosed at 22, and then I spent a year trying to get medication. It's really hard to access psychiatrists in New Zealand. They're just not available, and very expensive. And so when I finally got in with a psychiatrist to get my medication, honestly, it was great. I think there's a lot of stigma around medication and that it's being used to make the child normal, when actually ADHD medication works by bringing our dopamine levels up to what is normal in other people. And dopamine gives us motivation and happiness. So when I started my dopamine, the first thing I noticed was that my suicidal ideation stopped. Gone. It was great. But it did mean that the medication showed me just how much I was struggling when I wasn't medicated, which was quite hard to adjust to, because it was like, oh, like my life is so much harder than what other people are having. But I think when you actually have something to compare it to, it's kind of upsetting. Like, I don't know, like if you are used to being low income, for example, that's fine, you can manage that. But then if you were to experience being a millionaire, suddenly being low income is very hard to deal with. It's like that, where I saw how much easier things were with the medication, and now I know how hard my life is without it, and it makes it harder to manage without the medication.
For your book, so what made you decide all right, I'm going to write a book about autism, and this is it. I want to spread out the news and how for other people to be aware about as well in this space.
The book was actually an accident. I wrote the book for myself because I'd been diagnosed at 21. I keep hitting my mic. I'm sorry. I got diagnosed at 21, and that meant that I had to reprocess my entire life to make sense of it. And I was learning about autism and what that meant and how that was impacting my life. And it was a lot to think about, and there was a lot in my mind. And so I wrote the book and did the illustrations as a way of processing it and just putting it down somewhere in some kind of order so that it was just organized. And at the time that I was writing the book, I was a client here at Autism New Zealand, and one of my now colleagues sent screenshots to Verb Wellington, and 2 hours later I had a publisher calling me asking to have my book. And at first I didn't think anyone would want to read it, and so I spent the whole first phone call with my publisher talking about self-publishing and how to self-publish, because I wasn't really interested. But because she explained it all to me, I was like, okay, fine, you can have a book, whatever. So yeah, I signed with my publishers and they released the book, and next thing I knew, I was a best-selling author, and it's been really strange. Yeah.
So how do you feel about it? This is a huge change in your life as well, like having to want to self-publish versus someone will be publishing it for you, and suddenly a change. And
yeah, I was never intending on publishing. I thought if I did publish, only like 100 people would want it. So yeah, it's really surreal having so many people read my book. Also really weird being recognized. Yeah, but I think at the same time, it's also been really rewarding. Like, I love helping people, and so I love that this book has been able to help people and put a bit more of a positive light on things. I love that I have met young people who have read my book who are just so stoked to meet another autistic person. I love that I get to be someone who can advocate for these young people. Yeah, I had someone give feedback saying that I made it mainstream to say I'm autistic, and that they were really happy about that because they could say it and it didn't matter, because that's the title of the book. I loved it, and people saying that it gave them a voice. Yeah, that for me is really rewarding. And also I get to do public speaking, and I love public speaking. So yeah.
So do you do some preparations before you do public speaking, because you are going to be exposing yourself with a huge number of people, audience?
The first ones that I did were definitely a shock. Like, I enjoy public speaking, right? The first ones I went to, though, were with young people, and I spoke to a group of 11, 12-year-olds, and they had a lot of questions. It was great, but I had some neurodivergent 11-year-old, 12-year-olds come up to me afterwards who talked about being suicidal, and I was just in shock, because I was like, I know the issues for neurodivergent people are so deep and so big, and it would be really hard to fix them. But why are they so bad that our 11 and 12-year-old neurodivergent kids are feeling this way? And how do I even begin to fix that? So that was a lot a big shock, a lot to take in mentally. But after that, I think once it took me a while to recover from that one, but after that I've been more, I think it's given me more strength to keep doing the talks. A lot of my talks are with teachers, which I think is where I need to be, because that's where it's going to be impacting our young people. If our teachers know more and can be more positive about it, at least those kids are going to be in a space that is affirming for them.
Right.
I mean, yeah, there's the side, like, we do need to educate more professionals, we need to educate parents so that they have more of a positive understanding of it than a negative one. But yeah.
And one thing I've noticed is a lot of teachers are not, they probably have an idea about autism, but they are not fully aware or fully trained, if that's the term that I can use, fully trained and to handle children, neurodiverse children. And I've seen one in the news, like 1 in 3 autistic kids are being stood down from school because of that. So I think it's more of like the book, this one, when I showed this one to my wife, and she said like, oh, it makes more sense now. And a lot of the information in here is very, very easily digestible. When we had our diagnosis for my son back at the DHB, all of the terms that they're saying is technical, and they're talking about this and about that, and a lot of them, it's like someone is speaking in Chinese to a Filipino person. Like, okay, what do you mean about this? So most of the things that we've done is more on research as well, and this one made it far more easier for us to understand, like what you mean about, let's say, steaming, what you mean about implying. I saw that implying, and so it's so very helpful. You have an upcoming book, ADHD. So is it just a follow-up of this I Am Autistic book, or?
Yeah, so it looks pretty much the same as that, but it's obviously about ADHD. It's called This is ADHD, and it is designed slightly differently in terms of the coloring, because splatters of color like that would be really distracting for ADHD people and harder to read. So we ended up using ribbons of color instead.
I was telling my boss about this, and then she said, I already have that book. And then I'm preparing that book for my nephew. She has an autistic nephew, and she found it like it's going to be a very useful reference for her nephew as well. What can we learn about this book? And no, just one question first. One question at a time. I learned that from here.
So I think the thing that's been really good about this book is that a lot of people know the what when it comes to autism. So they know that we're blunt, they know that we're literal, they know that we stem, but they don't know the why. And I think that's what's causing some of the downfall. Like, teachers know autistic kids are going to have meltdowns, but they don't necessarily understand why. Why is this kid having a meltdown? Why is he acting in this way? Why is this kid flapping their hands? You know, so this book kind of gives more of the why. It lets you know what's actually going through the autistic person's mind, and that's what's going to help you understand and empathize with what they're dealing with. And so you're not seeing them as a misbehaving child or overreacting to something really small. Like, a meltdown could be that they've been dealing with intense stimulation all day long, and they're not just trying to get their way and throw a tantrum. Like, and the communication side of things, like, we're not intentionally being rude. It comes down to the way you're interpreting the language, and so having the why and that context is really important. And I think that's what I do in there.
Will it have the same narrative in terms of the ADHD book, like how to understand?
The ADHD one I had a little bit of fun with. Yes, it is the same idea, and it will explain the context behind different traits. When it comes to ADHD, it is more well known and more accepted, but, well, people think it is, but there's actually a lot more to it. Like, people hear ADHD and they think impulsive, hyperactive, but there's so much more to it. I struggled to keep it short for the ADHD. There was so much more to say, but also with the ADHD book, there's a lot that comes into, like, brain chemicals, and I'm so interested in it. And so I had a lot of fun trying to explain the more sciencey things in a way that people are going to understand. So, thank you.
No worries. Yeah. Just making sure it's still.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, take your time.
Okay. Yes.
What's the term ADHD means?
Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
What's the difference of that with ADD?
So ADD is not a label that's diagnosed anymore. So that used to be a diagnosis because obviously ADHD has hyperactive in it. So ADD was the type of ADHD that doesn't involve hyperactivity. But now they are combined, and instead you'll have ADHD, hyperactive impulsive type, or inattentive type ADHD, or combined ADHD. So inattentive ADHD is what would have previously been called ADD. Inattentive ADHD is a lot of the struggle happens internally, and there might be an element of hyperactivity in, like, they might talk really fast, but it's more internal, and the person can end up kind of almost in a paralysis, and they seem very lazy because they're just not doing anything. But it's all internal.
Yeah. You mentioned about the differences of that, and it's kind of like the Asperger's now, part of autism. I did mention one time to my wife, someone calling someone with Asperger's like high functioning, but my wife corrected me, like, we no longer use that, don't say that, and it's just autism, that's it, no more, nothing else. So what do you think is the difference, or why do you think that has been mislabeled?
Yeah, so there's a few things behind that. I mean, partly Asperger's, it has a negative history to it because Hans Asperger was a Nazi and was basically separating autistic people by the ones who were useful in the capitalist society and the ones who were not. That's the only separation there. Basically, the only difference, that's my phone. The only difference between Asperger's and autism at the time was that people with Asperger's could talk, basically. So they got combined into just autism, and we had people using high functioning and low functioning for a while. These terms are not very correct. So high functioning would be someone like me. I can talk, I can present in a way that's comfortable for other people, but it's not representative of my daily life and my struggles. I can't cook a meal by myself. I can't clean my room. Sometimes I can't talk, but I would be considered high functioning. And then you have people who would be considered low functioning, maybe because they can't talk, because they need a bit more support, but they might have degrees. They might be doing a lot more than a high functioning person would be. And so the autistic community has been kind of screaming out, like, we don't want these labels because they're incorrect. It's more like high masking, or high functioning is just how you perceive my autism rather than how I'm experiencing it. So we prefer to use support needs, so high support needs or low support needs, rather than functioning labels.
We are in the misconception about autism. So what are the main misconceptions about autism that you have, like, figured out, or someone might have, or experienced perhaps?
So, I mean, there are a few. There's everyone's a little bit autistic. I think when people say that, they're thinking that they're being sympathetic or nice to people, but it's actually very invalidating because it's like, oh no, you're fine because we're all a little bit autistic. It's like kind of brushing off someone's difficulties that they're having. It's also just not correct because the autism spectrum is not linear. It is more like a circle, and every autistic person has different experiences with different traits, and those traits can fluctuate over time. And you're either on that spectrum or you're not. Autistic traits are human traits, so anyone can experience them. They're not just like, only autistic people can experience these things. No, that's not how it works. So there's that one. Then there's the only boys can be autistic. Not true. I think part of the reason we have that misconception is because the diagnostic criteria that we have for autism is based on 8-year-old boys, which makes it very hard for females to get diagnosed. and females often get misdiagnosed. Also because we present very differently to little boys.
Right.
So there's that. A lot of people think that autistic people don't know right from wrong, and so you'll have a lot of people saying, "Oh, he just doesn't understand." He does. Like autistic people understand a lot more than you realize. Even non-verbal autistic people, they still understand, and they're still trying to communicate. It's just going to be in a different way. Another thing is that people think that intellectual or a learning disability or intellectual disability is a part of autism, but it's not. It's a separate thing that occurs in some autistic people.
Right. That's about cognitive ability, its ability to learn or perceive.
Yeah, so the like IQ, I suppose. Yeah, the intellectual disability or learning disability is what the community prefers to call it. Yeah, it's not a part of autism. It's something that occurs alongside it. Yeah, and then I don't really know. I can't remember. There's a lot of them. I just can't think of them right now. The misconceptions around it.
Someone mentioned to you you don't look autistic. And similarly with Dana, with her daughter as well, like your daughter doesn't look autistic. And I told that to my wife, and she was like, "What does an autistic person look like? Like, is there a model? Like, maybe we should find out."
I do hear that one quite a bit. You don't look autistic. I had a psychiatrist say it to me once. It's such a silly statement because it's like, what, have you developed X-ray vision? Can you see my brain? I'm sorry. I often respond to people, well, you don't look neurotypical. And then I let them get offended by it and watch them trying to figure out why they're offended by it, because that statement of you don't look autistic, it is a very ableist statement, right?
Have you seen them being able to like get offended? Have you seen them?
I've seen a few people get offended by it.
All right.
But it does make them think. I mean, I do still explain it to them, and I explain, you know, autism doesn't look a particular way. What, do you want me rocking in a corner, flapping my hands all the time? Like, we still have lives. We still have to do things. Yeah.
When I had a few of my episodes early on, and I mentioned to one parent like, we are all on the spectrum, which is incorrect. Yeah. Like my wife said, no, it's either you're autistic or you're not, and definitely you're not autistic, she was telling me. So I mean, like, it was a misconception on my part, which is very careless, and I was called out by an autistic person, which is cool as well. I no harm done. I think I made harm when someone heard it. So, but again, as parents new to this space, we're still trying to learn about a lot of stuff and a lot of things and words that we should use that won't offend, especially the autistic person, because it's very literal. And so are you learning about metaphors? And so at least you won't get confused with the neurotypical world.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, like, navigating that space as a parent of an autistic person it's got to be challenging. Like, you're coming into a space where people are very black and white, right? And they're going to tell you if you're using the wrong words, and often that can come across as an attack, when it's just like, we're really tired of hearing all the negative language, and we're not trying to be mean. In regards to metaphors, I'm trying to learn some of them. I definitely still get very confused by some that I hear. I mean, once I've learnt a metaphor, I've learnt it. Sometimes I might still not understand it in the context, but it's just kind of amusing when they happen. Like, we had a meeting once and someone said, let's have a chin wag, and I'm like, what the heck is that? I still haven't learnt it. I don't know what that is. But there was another one that was, we're talking about the ability to think laterally. I was like, what? Ability to think sideways? Like, how do you think laterally? I don't understand. And so I like actually started reading up on it, and it's to do with like dogs tilting their heads.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, when there's a metaphor I don't understand, I do get someone to explain it to me. But I think it's not metaphors that I have the hard time with, it's implications. Because, I mean, people don't use metaphors in everyday language, right? But implications are in everything. So many people don't realize how much they're implying. Like, say I get up from my desk and go, oh, I want to get a glass of water. If the person next to me says, oh, can you bring me a glass? I don't know what they want in the glass.
Just glass. Oh,
Yeah.
Just glass.
Yeah, so that kind of thing happens all the time. So many miscommunications that way, because I'm like, well, what do you actually want? Because you haven't said the full sentence. Yeah.
Right, makes sense. If you're in a group of neurotypical people and they're playing jokes or saying jokes, are you able to like confirm if it's a joke or it's kind of like being serious?
I struggled with that so much until I got diagnosed. I always just thought people were being really mean all the time. I didn't understand that they were joking. And then I got diagnosed, and I have some friends who are very sarcastic, and I didn't know that they were being sarcastic until I got diagnosed. And then when they realized, they're like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, Chanelle. Like, we've been saying all these things that are really offensive. And I didn't know. And so now, like, when I'm with those people, when they are joking or being sarcastic, they'll realize, oh, Chanelle's autistic, she doesn't understand. And then they'll tell me. They're like, oh, I'm being sarcastic, it's fine. I'm like, oh, okay.
I met someone who's autistic as well. I checked with him, like, if I will be telling you a joke, would you consider me telling you first that I'm going to tell you a joke versus telling it straight up? No, you have to tell me.
Yeah.
Like, all right. So there's no longer punchline. I mean, like, because I'm going to tell you a joke, so which means I'm expecting you to laugh.
Yeah.
You know?
I think I like it when people tell me afterwards. Like, if you tell me beforehand, then I'm like expecting the joke. But if you tell the joke and then go, oh, it was a joke, I'm like, oh, that's actually really funny. That, like, I find that works. I think people don't like telling you when it's a joke, because then it's like, oh, well, it's not fun anymore because now you have to tell you. But it's still funny.
Do you hate surprises like gifts, like it's box?
Oh, on the joke side of things. The other thing with that is, like, people don't realize when I'm joking. It's kind of amusing. Anyway, gifts. No. I like gifts if I don't have to open them in front of people. I really struggle with, like,
the reaction?
Yeah, because I don't know how I'm supposed to react to the gift, and I always get it wrong. But I've also, my whole life, I don't know why this is what I do, but if I open a gift and it's a clothing item, I put it on immediately. If I get multiple clothing items, I put them all on at the same time. It was quite funny for Christmas because my brother's girlfriend got me this top, and I opened my gift and immediately put it on before everyone had finished opening the gift. So my brother was like, oh, where's the top that you got her? And she was like, she's wearing it.
That's what they're supposed to be, right?
Well, I think part of the reason I do it was because I couldn't figure out how I was supposed to react to show that I appreciated it. And so I figured if I put it on, they know I like it. So that's what I did.
So going back to that diagnosis for you, so what can we say to those who are still like haven't been diagnosed, but they kind of like feel something is not quite right? And is there a cue or a trait that they need to find out, so at least they know how to navigate it?
I think it's definitely something that takes people a long time to realize. In childhood, it's definitely easier to notice if you know what to look for. So I grew up, I lived with a family for a while who had some kids, I'm pretty sure autistic, but this kid would walk on his toes all the time. He had to have his blanket very perfectly on his neck, wouldn't understand communication. So like his dad would be like, oh, this is your brother's dinner and this is yours. And he would take his, and then dad would be like, well, this is your brother's dinner. And he's like, okay, can you give this to your brother? Oh, okay. Yeah, so like, I mean, you can kind of pick up on it if you know what to look for. When it comes to adults, particularly females, a lot of us are hiding it a bit better, and so it becomes a bit harder then. So what happens for a lot of adults who are realizing they're autistic is they kind of go through this really long process of looking into it, reading up on it, doing heaps of screening tools, going, oh, am I autistic? And then they'll go, oh no, I'm definitely not autistic. And they'll be like, oh no, I am. And then there'll be denial, like, oh no, I'm mocking the autistic community by thinking I'm autistic. And then eventually they'll get to a point where they're like, okay, I'm autistic. And like they'll self-diagnose. And that's after like a long time. A lot of people go through a very long process for that. And it can be very hard to access an assessment. So in the autistic community, most of us consider self-diagnosis to be valid because it can be very difficult to get an assessment. It can be difficult to find a professional who knows about female autism or adult autism. So yeah, there's just a lot to it. Then there's some mental health diagnoses that are commonly misdiagnosed in autistic people. So like borderline personality disorder is one that I received a borderline personality disorder diagnosis before I got my autism diagnosis. So yeah, I mean, there's a few things. Like if you have sensory processing disorder, ADHD, OCD, and BPD, you're probably just autistic.
When it comes to you doing the masking, when did you realize like, oh, I feel like I'm masking because I'm putting too much effort now with like trying to fit in?
The thing is, like, I thought everyone was doing it, so it wasn't something I questioned. I would spend every single social interaction monitoring how much eye contact I was giving, monitoring the tone of my voice, monitoring the order of the words coming out of my mouth, what facial expressions I'm using, what emotion I'm portraying, what gestures I'm using, how much I'm moving, and like what the vibe of the group is, what emotion are they expressing, what are the social rules in the situation. It was exhausting and I could barely listen to anyone who was talking, but I thought everyone was doing it, and so I was like, well, no one talks about this, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I would get so exhausted from it that I slowly learned that mimicking was easier. I've been doing that most of my life, to be fair, but mimicking would mean that I would copy the person's accent, I would copy their mannerisms, I would copy the patterns of their speech. And like people would notice that I was picking up their mannerisms or their accent. Sometimes they'd think I was mocking them. I didn't realize. I didn't realize that was me masking until I got diagnosed. And I was like, oh, wait, you're not all sitting there like consciously making all of these decisions about what your body and your mouth is doing the whole time. So yeah, once I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, well, since you are not doing that, I'm going to try and stop. And so I've spent the last 3 years just learning how to be me in social situations and learning how to not try and do everything that everyone else is doing. The mimicking still happens. I do still copy people's accents without realizing, which I don't mind. Like, it's kind of amusing. Like, I'll do radio interviews and I'll suddenly have a British accent or something. It's kind of funny.
Cool.
Yeah.
So that's a skill, by the way. Yeah, and it's a difficult skill. You're trying to pretend to be someone you're not. Yeah. In terms of the support system, you were diagnosed at 21, so obviously most of the supports are no longer apply to you.
Yeah. So when I got diagnosed at 21, I was lucky that I had a psychiatrist who was really psychologist who was really knowledgeable in female autism. And so she supported me to get a needs assessment done through the local NASC. And when we didn't agree with the result of that assessment, she helped me challenge it. So I ended up getting 5 hours of support a week to help with like cooking and cleaning. So that was one thing that helped. The other thing is just knowing that I was autistic allowed me to find the things that I needed to help myself. So because I had been struggling with my mental health, depression, whatever, usually what you're told to do is go out more, pick up more hobbies, spend more time with people. As an autistic person, that was burning me out because that's a lot of stimulation, it's a lot of masking, it's a lot of energy to use. So I was getting overstimulated, I was just making myself worse and putting myself in a state of meltdown. And so when I got my diagnosis, I was able to go, well, actually, going out and doing these things is making me worse. What I actually need is to spend more time with less stimulation. So I was able to do that, and it's helped a lot. It's also meant that I could recognize that when I'm in a meltdown, I don't need to go try die. I need to go and sit under my weighted blanket or play with some Lego or something. And that's working really well. And then I guess also being able to explain to people that I communicate differently, I understand things differently, has meant that there's fewer miscommunications in my relationships. we're able to be more understanding of each other. With my family, for example, my mum would get really offended if I didn't respond to everything she said. And since I got diagnosed, we realized, I'm not responding, not because I'm ignoring you, but because I just genuinely don't have a response to what you're saying, or I can't talk right now, so I'm not responding. And it's not like me being rude or hateful, it's just I genuinely don't have anything to say, or I can't say anything.
That makes sense. I think it's the neurotypical parent of me, like if I told you something, you have to respond like, is it a yes or a no? or even just a nod will suffice. Yeah. And I think it's just like being acknowledged, like, hey, can you maybe clean up your room? And then suddenly it's quiet and no one is responding. So yes, I think it's just a neurotypical kind of thing that you're expecting something in return for communication to be like two ways rather than me saying it and then I don't get a response.
Yeah, I think some of the ones I had with that would be like, people would be asking the wrong question. So my support worker, for example, she said, do you want to put the chicken in the oven before I arrive? I texted her back, no, because I don't want to. I still did it. I didn't want to, but I needed to do it, so I still did it. She arrived, she's like, oh, we should probably put the chicken in the oven. I'm like, what do you mean? I've already done it. She's like, well, you said no. I'm like, yeah, because you asked me if I want to. I don't want to.
How's the family?
Yeah, my family life, we had fallen apart. Like, I had no contact with my mum before my diagnosis. Things were just really bad between us. And then I got my diagnosis, and it just helped a lot of us actually understand what was actually going on and why there was so much hurt between us. And we're able to actually talk through that, and we have a much better relationship now, and it's really good. Especially realizing the pathological demand avoidance side of things. Like, I was a very stubborn child because of pathological demand avoidance. So anytime my parents would tell me to do something, I would just turn into a little bit of a demon, honestly. Very, very mad and angry anytime I was told to do anything. But now that we have that understanding, my mum's able to talk to me in a way that works, and she's able to understand my communication. But on top of that, so we figured out that some other family members are also autistic. So I'm able to explain some of the things to my mum that she's maybe frustrated with them. So like if there's something happening in their relationship and she's really annoyed about it, she talks to me about it and I go, well, this is why that thing's happening. And my mum's learning like that when you want something from an autistic person, you have to give an explanation. You have to give the why and the logic behind it. So she's learning how to have those conversations. Right now, it feels like she has to have a debate anytime she wants something done. But she's slowly learning the language to use to make that shorter and shorter so that she can not have to fight every time.
Right. It seems to me you've opened a lot of eyes in terms of the autism world and how we should try and understand the whole community. And for me personally, I was having a conversation kind of similar with my wife about the autism, and she was telling me, no, your son is already like thriving in his own way. I mean, like he's there, he's always happy. But the challenge now would be the whole society. And the society is built for neurotypical, obviously, and now we just need to like make sure that we go and enter into his world, so at least we can teach him about like daily living skills and life skills. So he's going to, so at least he can thrive in the neurotypical world. Autism parents are now opening their eyes about the autism world. So at least there's a bit of like, not bit, but we are going steadfast and being able to like understand the whole world. You mentioned forgetting to eat. Is it something that is, it's no longer like for neurotypical, it's like, oh, it's 12 noon, so it's lunchtime, or you don't have a sense of cue on?
No, so I don't feel hunger. I don't feel fullness. Don't know when I need to drink. Don't know when I need the toilet. Like I can't feel it. I feel nothing at all. I can go days without food and not realize because I just don't get hungry. I don't have those cues. I do have an alarm on my phone that tells me to eat. But yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, it would happen so much. I'd be like, oh yeah, it's been 3 days, haven't eaten. It was my normal. I just didn't realize that there were different feelings that people felt that I didn't feel. There have been very few times where I have felt hunger, but it lasts all of 2 seconds and then it's gone. Yeah.
That's going to be challenging. I mean, you have to remind yourself. Good thing we have alarms now in our phones.
Getting into a good routine is really helpful with that, because if I have a routine where it's like, okay, I get out of bed, I get changed. After I get changed, I eat food. And then after I eat food, I brush my teeth. Like if my meal is associated with the rest of my routine, I have to do it. Whereas if it's like, oh, somewhere in there I eat food, then that's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Do you have allergies, like food allergies?
Dairy is an issue, and I am so severely allergic to grass that I react to some fruits.
So do you manage that in terms of like medicines or medications?
Really need to, like, I can avoid the foods, it's not too big a deal, but I also have such severe sensory issues that food is also a problem anyway. So I mean, I do struggle to eat food because it's like, it's just gross. And when you don't feel hunger, like it's a chore, like it's not satisfying to eat food. You're just eating it because you have to eat food.
So you don't have a sense of taste, like this
I mean, like I can taste the food, but
okay.
So like, I mean, when you feel hungry and you eat food, the food then satisfies that hunger. So it feels good for most people to be eating, but because I don't feel hunger, I'm not satisfied by eating my food. I might enjoy the flavor sometimes, but my senses are so intense that it's often just overwhelming.
It's like a task for you rather than enjoyment. Oh, okay. Non-verbal versus non-speaking. What's the difference? Is it a choice or?
So the reason I use both of those terms in my book is because, generally speaking, the non-verbal community prefers non-speaking. I can't remember the exact reasoning, but it's a preference of that community that they prefer to be called non-speaking. But it's still kind of a term that hasn't fully transitioned yet, because there's some debate about what the different language means. Like, to me, verbal would mean speaking with your mouth. And so for me, it would make sense to me that if I can't talk, I would be non-verbal. But I mean, obviously, I'm not full-time non-speaking, so I can't really say what that community prefers. It's just a preference. They can mean the same thing.
Right.
I think we are kind of heading towards a point where non-verbal won't be the language we're using, but I think the community kind of needs to come to an agreement on what they want it to be called.
But it's not necessarily like for my son's case, it's not necessarily like he doesn't, no, he can speak, he's starting to speak now, but he was diagnosed autism nonverbal. Like, what does that mean? Is he going to learn how to speak? Is he not going to speak?
Yeah, so I mean, people who are nonverbal or non-speaking, they can obviously learn to talk. They might just find that it's too exhausting for them. So like, when I get to spaces where I can't talk, I could probably force myself to, but it hurts and it's very, very tiring, and I stutter. Sometimes the words won't come out, and I would rather write. And I can only get a few words out at a time. For someone who's full-time non-speaking, probably it would be significantly harder for them. I can't imagine. But also, if you don't learn how to talk when you're younger, it's harder to then learn. And so trying to talk would also be maybe triggering some like self-conscious feelings. So if I don't want to sound wrong, like I'm older, I should be able to say the words correctly, but I never learned. And that's like, it's not fair to be putting that on themselves. But if you haven't learned, you haven't learned. So what? I think there's a lot of ways we can communicate, and I think the community needs to be more open to taking that on board. I mean, because I can talk, people don't let me communicate any other way most of the time. when actually, like, I could write, I could text, I could point at pictures. There's so many different ways to communicate with people. Yeah.
Do you want to drink your coffee
yeah,
first?
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's all right. Sensory issues versus, you ready?
Yeah.
Sensory issues versus sensory processing disorders.
Same thing.
Same thing?
Well, sensory processing disorder is what would be the diagnosis. And I think a lot of people have sensory issues but haven't been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. As an autistic person, I haven't been formally diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, but I do have a sensory processing disorder. I'm just gonna put that down. And I think it's also, again, something a lot of people don't understand. They think we're just overreacting, when in reality, like, for a lot of us, our senses are very heightened. So a lot of us can hear electricity, we can hear lights. For me, perfumes make me feel like I'm suffocating. Jeans can, depending on the fabric, this one's fine because it's stretchy, but jeans feel like thorns running down the back of my skin. So it's not just that we're kind of overreacting, it's we can feel and hear and smell and taste so much more than a lot of other people. Or they might be on the other side, where they feel much less than other people and they need more stimulation to get their brains working. Yeah. And then, I mean, also with the senses, we have like the proprioception and the interoception and the vestibular system. So me not feeling dizzy ever is a sensory thing as well. Yeah.
Learning those things from our Autism 101, Autism 101 in Hutt Valley. And it's more of like the foundation, but now I totally forgot most of them, most of the proprioceptions and stuff. But I believe they're important in terms of understanding the way children behave, or how you are going to address, like, they're having sensory issues in the classroom and stuff like that. Is there any other materials or like references that you are using from this book that we can probably use as well as part of like learning those things and making sure that we understand the whole concept?
I think I did reference a couple links in my acknowledgements. There's one on there that was about sensory issues. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I do think they're very important things to look into, because I mean, something like proprioception, if a person's not processing that correctly, they might be really rough and not know that they're being rough, or they might be hitting things or throwing themselves into walls because they're looking for proprioceptive input, but then the response from other people is to try and stop the behavior, but not necessarily replace it with something that's safer. So a person who's like hitting things, or I don't know, whatever, if they're hitting things, it could be a proprioceptive thing and you need to give them some other form of input. So yeah, it's very good to look into, especially like interoception as well, which is not being able to tell that you're hungry, or feeling constantly hungry, which is, I can't imagine. And for teachers at schools, like, have you got a grumpy child in your classroom? Is it because they haven't eaten? You can try that. Or they might not know that they're hot. Do they need to take off the hoodie? They might not know. Yeah.
Similar to that, hitting the child hitting themselves, like my son used to like bang his head on the floor whenever he's overwhelmed with his sensory. But he used to do that, but he outgrown it, which is a good thing. My understanding for that is like having a migraine and you can't do anything about the migraine, and there's nothing else to do just to hit yourself on the wall. I'm not sure if that's the correct, I'm trying to relate it to that.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain. I think because of the way I grew up, so in South Africa, being loud as a young female wasn't really allowed. And so I would get hit for being loud because it was misbehaving. And so I learnt that having that type of meltdown wasn't okay. And so my meltdowns turned into suicide attempts. And then once I got diagnosed, I had to try and figure out how to replace that, which has meant that I started having meltdowns where I had these urges to hit myself or like pull at my hair, scratch myself. And it's hard to explain. It's kind of like you're having a panic attack, which you're completely out of control of. But like, you have this urge to hit yourself. And I'm not really, I feel like, yeah, the hitting myself is definitely like a proprioceptive thing. Like I just want to be squeezed. Yeah. The scratching is like, I need a distraction from, or I need to get this out of my brain and I can't get it out of my brain and I'm so overwhelmed and what do I do? Like you kind of just get so overwhelmed that, you know, what else are you gonna do? And you need to get the energy out and it's really hard.
Really, yeah. I couldn't imagine my son. I always turn back to him and it's so challenging for him to see the world like, oh, this is a weird world, you know. So any final message to the general public or anyone from the autism community in terms of the journey or the struggle or the challenge that they're undergoing?
I think it's really important to try and find information that's positive because there's so much negative information, especially when like either you just get diagnosed or your kid gets diagnosed, you're presented with all of this medical deficit-based information. So I think it's really important to find positive stuff so that you can grow up and not see yourself through this really negative lens. I also think it's really important to engage and listen to autistic adults because they're the ones who are living it every day of their lives, right? If you've never lived it, you can't even begin to understand it or pretend to understand it, I suppose. But I think I recognize the challenge with engaging with autistic adults because of the way we communicate and how it can come off very strong. So just know that like we're not trying to attack you and we're not trying to be rude. Brace yourself.
Just being honest up front.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it can be hard to hear. Like the things we can say might not be what you want to hear. But yeah, if you are a parent of an autistic person, pick your battles. You're not going to win them all, I promise.
Pick something that you're going to be able to win.
Yeah. I mean, some days are going to be hard and that's that. And I don't know, like, we're very logical, so if you can give us logic, probably be good. None of that, because I told you so, it's not going to work, sorry. Yeah.
Right. And my son just woke up like for the past few days, not a couple of days, but he's been waking up recently for around 4:30. He used to wake up like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and then that went away, and now he's kind of like waking up 4:30 a.m. and everyone is awake now. 4:30 a.m.
Yeah.
So,
What I did, because I sometimes wake up like that and then I can't tell if I'm supposed to still be sleeping. I have a Galaxy projector that projects on my ceiling and it turns itself off at 7 in the morning. So if I wake up and it's still on, I'm like, okay, I still need to be sleeping. If I wake up and it's off, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be getting up soon. So that way, that's how I know that I'm still meant to be in bed.
right. So is it a body clock thing or is it something that aligns with your body clock?
The light?
Yeah.
No, the light, so it's just a Galaxy projector, so it projects like stars and whatnot on the ceiling and they move around. I need a night light to be able to sleep anyway, so that works well for me. I mean, because I can't really tell if I'm still meant to be sleeping or if I'm meant to be awake. I just don't know. So having the light helps me with that. It also turns itself on at 9:45 p.m. So I'm like, okay, it's on. It's almost bedtime. I'll get myself ready for bed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to say anything about the book?
There's obviously the autism book, which has been out probably a year now. And then the ADHD one comes out, well, by the time you release this podcast, it'll be out already. Yeah.
So where can they grab?
It should be in all bookstores. Wickles will probably be the easiest place to find it, but I'm not allowed to recommend one store, so also Paper Plus.
Do you sell is this available internationally as well?
So currently it's available in New Zealand and Australia, and then I have a North American publisher as well, so it's available in North America. We were selling through Book Depository, which people can buy internationally, but book depositories shut down.
Yeah, they closed
So we're-
recently.
yeah,
right.
trying to figure out another option because there are some people in other countries who have bought this one who will want the second one, but we'll see.
Do you fist bump? Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Every Tāngata fight Takiwātanga is different. If you fail with one strategy, don't stop. Keep moving forward. Always remember that for every failure you encounter is one step closer to your success. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, me muto te whakawa haere. Let's stop judging others. Me mahi tahi tato. Let's all work together. Kia maya, kia kaha, be brave and be strong.